Will Trump run for another election, that is, a third term in the White House? And will Mango support him? And how do you feel about this? I'll tell you how I feel about it. We all said that this is impossible for a simple reason. It contradicts the Constitution, and Trump does not have the right to a third term. And what about the fact that a moderately wealthy billionaire woman, she says, well, my friend Trump, if you run, I'll give you, let's say, 225 million or 250 million C's, some figure like that, a pretty substantial amount. Oh, yes, by the way, one very serious lawyer, legal scholar, I know that's not the usual term, let's say a legal expert, says that it's not all that simple in the Constitution, the way it's written there. Anyway, we'll talk about that too. I'll tell you about it now because honestly, it's insanely funny. So if something like that is really going on in Trump's head, then who is preparing the documentation? Because that's a serious matter. Convincing America you have the right doesn't mean a third term is allowed, even if it says you can be elected. Well, okay, so yes, Trump also recently told the whole world, he said, get ready, something is going to happen. So what is he urging us to prepare for? After Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we call him Franklin, Delano Roosevelt was elected president of the United States 4 times in a row. 4 times. There was concern in the country about the concentration of power in a lifelong president-dictator. In 1947, the so-called 22nd Amendment was adopted. The same person cannot be elected to the office of president more than twice, meaning, well, 2 times maximum. Yes, unfortunately, this was not done for senators, congressmen, or other elected officials, but it was done for the president. Well, now, the Congress, which is supposed to put this into practice, of course, won't vote for it. Now you'll see. So, Miriam Adelson, as I said, is a moderately wealthy woman. She has $32 billion.
So do you think he will look for a workaround?
Yeah, the Republican Party is in his pocket, so he'll do something. I don't know.
What exactly is possible? And I would really like that. I would definitely support it, and I would do everything I could to help. Why? Because I think that finally, regardless of what you think about Trump and his personality, I think he is getting results.
A third term is unconstitutional. Does that concern you? Oh, right, I forgot about that. Yes.
Donald J. Trump. Miriam, I don't think he's joking, and that's not a compliment to Trump in that form, so to speak, but a real suggestion, voiced as if by an outsider. Well, Miriam is not a staff member. In 2024, she gave Trump's Super Political Action Committee $250 million. Yes, you heard that right. So don't you think she suggested repeating Greene's disloyalty?
Greene's betrayal ultimately led to her losing her seat, but she wasn't going to leave without a fight.
And the storm began. Well, it's a storm in a teacup. Yeah, the liberal media just went crazy. Well, I said it like they ever had any sense, but whatever, I'm not going to correct myself now.
Loyalty should be mutual. And we have to vote our conscience and represent the interests of our district, because our position is literally that of a representative.
This episode revealed something bigger, that the once unshakable base of support for Trump might actually be starting to crack. Republicans who are set to face voters in next year's midterm elections are paying close attention to Democrats' victories in local elections and to Trump's extremely low approval rating.
Honestly, for me, this is a surprise. A highly respected lawyer and Republican expert whom I admire, Alan Gershkovich, said something about this. What did he say? It turns out Alan did an entire study and published it as a 120-page book called Can Trump run for a third term without violating the Constitution? A key point, without violating the Constitution. Yeah, can you imagine how much yelling and screaming there would be? How much outrage and how many promises from liberals to leave the United States forever? You know, there was this old Soviet children's joke, so to speak. Masha, I want to visit Paris again, says Vasya. Have you been to Paris? No, but I've always wanted to go. And it's the same with our liberals, so to speak. We're all leaving the United States again. Did you ever leave? No, but I already wanted to leave and said no. Well, all right, let's keep watching.
Republican candidate Matt Van Epps won by a small margin of 9 points. That's a significant drop compared to Trump's 22-point victory. There in 2024, there are serious concerns within the party ranks that this could spell doom for the subtitles.
So what's the problem with this third term? The 22nd Amendment to the Constitution, as we've already discussed, says that a person is limited. Any person can be elected president no more than twice, but maybe you can become president without being elected president, because it seems like what is prohibited is not being president, but specifically being elected. Everyone knows that if Trump runs in the elections legally, he wins. But at least with what will happen in the economy in the next year or year and a half, unless there are some cosmological changes or upheavals, Trump is back in the White House, where he stays for 2.5, at most 3 years, then hands over the position to his successor, and that person runs for election already as president. Let's say Vance, for example, would win with a 90% chance. Interesting, then keep listening, because it's going to get even more interesting. And I even promise a cherry on top.
It's just too ironic that you're so close, but the vice president can't be elected president, so you can't be vice president on this list either.
Do you think Trump's ego would let him be vice president?
That's a completely different question. Let's just say I can't understand that he'd be willing to take a subordinate position, and that's where I think this conversation is coming from.
Is that clear? So you can't be elected more than twice. You can't be elected president more than that. You can run 100 times if you want, but you can only be elected president twice. But what if it happens that, according to the law, he has to become president without actually being elected? What's interesting is that it's about to get even more exciting. Well, for example, if, let's say, Trump runs not for president, but for vice president, then the pair wins and the elected president says, I'm stepping down. Who by law becomes president then without an election? Well, there's a problem, actually a small one. It's actually called two problems. The Second and 12th Amendments. And they say that the vice president must meet the same formal requirements, the same criteria, as the president. So it doesn't work. It seems that this idea of ours won't work, so what will work? Well, maybe we can repeal or amend one of these amendments, the 2nd, the 12th, or the 20th. You notice that they all seem to end with a 2, right? But how can we change them?
The presidency is just constitutional, so why do it? And then suddenly, again and again, little by little, bit by bit, you start having these conversations. Then he releases merch. There are actually hats for T 2028. It's a good campaign message. It sparks interest and media topics for discussion. What is he a genius at again? But it shows that we just don't know the Constitution. We don't resist, including our elected leaders, even from his own party. We don't even resist the very idea, because it's a joke. As long as it's not true, it's unlikely. As long as it's not true, it's impossible until it becomes true. And I'm afraid we've crossed that line. Is it really now so possible that enough of his supporters want to make it happen? We also saw that on January 6th.
If that's one reason people talk about him, what other motives are there for suggesting or supporting a third term? Even he himself doesn't want that.
It just creates the potential for him to stay in power. And whether it's Donald Trump, there's a huge ecosystem, including many of his supporters, including, by the way, members of Congress who will really like that. Yes, no one can provide the kind of support that Donald Trump gave him and his party. Maybe that will change, but there are a lot of people, including millions of Americans, who just like it, who just love it.
I can't say I like this, but who said you have to sit twice and not 3 times in a free office, right? No one said that. The main thing is to stop it, not let anyone become a lifelong president and concentrate punitive instruments of power in their hands. But let's leave the judgments, the moral ones, I mean, for the end, and turn to what's happening in our big politics. By the way, the addition of this third term in the way they were just talking about it, meaning if the terms are not consecutive, shows what this really is. The amendment can be made for one specific person because in modern United States history, only one person has won 2 non-consecutive terms. Before that, during the 250 years of the United States' existence, there was only one Grover Cleveland, who was elected as the 22nd and 24th President of the United States, and the 21st was not very well known. That was Benjamin Harrison, who introduced the terrible, destructive so-called antitrust legislation. So, fortunately, he was not elected for a second term. Former chief political advisor to Trump, Steve Bannon, claims that he has a plan for Trump to legally remain in the White House. For the third time, Trump says, Bannon, there will be a third time. There will be an exclamation mark in the White House. It's necessary for the country. 2 exclamation marks are already from me. By the way, what do you think about this? So, what do you think about this? Is it necessary for the country, or is it a violation of democracy? As for Benham, he doesn't say how he plans to do it, so how can it be done? He just vaguely answers that there are many different possibilities. KU.
This coincided with him entering the status of, I don't know, a lame duck. The question arises, who's next? And someone has to fill that void. Their delicate dance, right now, not upsetting him as still the leader and president of their party, while at the same time positioning themselves as his successor. And what happens next, we don't know. There is a Make America Great Again wing in the Republican Party, and there is the Republican Party that wants to return to a sense of more traditional Republican values. But they'll have to figure that out over the next 3 years. And not to mention the upcoming presidential election season, it's going to be a huge battle on the Republican side. So if in the real world re-election is out of the question, what do you think Trump's goal is for the next 3 years? It's all about legacy. That's why we see him so committed to the international peace process, his involvement in, even if it's just at the news level, de-escalating wars or ending them. He knows domestic politics are complicated, which is obvious. It's hard to get things through Congress, but he has significant unilateral power internationally. He can send his emissaries and negotiators anywhere in the world. There is no shortage of conflicts that require de-escalation, and he understands that this could be his trump card on the international stage. What could lead to the huge goal he has pursued for so long? The Nobel Peace Prize?
And here is Steve Bannon himself, very
briefly. Give me your comment from a legal perspective on the 22nd Amendment and all this chatter that the White House likes to call just a joke.
It's a joke. From a constitutional perspective, the 22nd Amendment is clear. Presidents can only serve 2 terms. There's just no room for maneuver there.
I've seen some things. I wouldn't call it scientific research. I'd call it a legal analysis in defense of interests, which claims that, well, it means 2 consecutive terms, and if Trump didn't serve consecutively, it's still allowed.
The drafters of the 22nd Amendment knew the word consecutive, but deliberately didn't use it. They knew presidents had served non-consecutive terms before. It wouldn't have surprised them, yet they still chose not to mention it, preferring to say no more than 2 terms.
A person like Trump, someone like Trump, appears only once or twice in the country's history, says Steve. And it would be foolish to reject him just because we set limits for others. I have to emphasize that when Trump was asked several times in serious interviews whether he really intends to become president again, he replied that he is a 2-term president and that he will not run for a 3rd term. Well, now let's see if we can come up with something that could make someone president without an election. We know that if the president is unable to fulfill his duties, the vice president takes his place. But what if the vice president can't either? Then the Speaker of the House moves into the White House, right? And here's an interesting thing. To become the Speaker of Congress, you don't have to be a member of Congress. It can be an invited person. If 51 members of the House of Representatives vote for Donald Trump, he becomes the Speaker of Congress. So Vance becomes president and then resigns. Well, for example, Rubio becomes president from vice president and immediately resigns before, so to speak, he found, appointed, or chose a new vice president for himself. And then Donald Trump, without an election, thank you, bad luck, since he is required to serve less than 2 terms in office, becomes president. Of course, there will be a complaint to the Supreme Court, but here, as they say, it's a toss-up. Whether it will happen or not, no one knows. I would say it's very possible. That is, there's a chance, yes, it's possible that because of the 22nd Amendment, he will be allowed. Allowed, meaning he won't be taken as Speaker of Congress, supposedly because of the 22nd Amendment. That's exactly what the opponents will say. And then the time comes for the Senate representative to be sworn in and go up. So that means this option doesn't work either, so you have to run through it first and then do it again. I mean, to file something that would reach the Supreme Court so that they could decide this case. But I think there are plenty of people who understand this case without me, so I won't make people laugh. So, my opinion on this is that I wouldn't want Trump to decide to fight for a 3rd term. It's against the spirit of the Constitution and actually against my ideas about the necessity of timely changes of power. Trump should prepare a group that he will leave behind, like a team with a clear plan of action approved by this group. And secondly, his tremendous efforts should put the country on the track of moving in the right direction, namely towards a free market and healthy competition with minimal government interference in the affairs of citizens, and also a reduction in both government spending and taxes, and the complete elimination of the income tax. It needs to be abolished entirely so that Marxism doesn't even come close. Where are the United States located? Then the next step should be the transition from political democracy to so-called market democracy, which alone can guarantee that we won't return to what happened under those thieves and bandits elected by the people's will. The highest levels of power under Obama, Clinton, Biden, and their actually criminal team, Trump's reforms must continue. They need enough time to make returning nearly impossible, to be continued. When people are doing well, it's hard to convince them to go back to worse times. Just try, for example, to get people to switch from cars to donkeys, although you can generally get around on them too. And for a while, riding a donkey instead of walking was amazing, yes, but replacing a car or a high-speed train with a donkey isn't so great. That's why it's not about Trump, but about Trumpism. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we want, Trumpism, so that it doesn't end. Trumpism is common sense. Trumpism is encouraging those who do good, freedom, and security. That's what Trumpism is. This should continue for 3, 4, 16 terms. Always on this. That's it. Goodbye.